The rain fell in sheets against the towering glass windows of the Moretti building, and Sofia Bellini stood at the doorway of the penthouse, with a single suitcase gripped in her trembling hand. Well. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than she had ever heard it, but the words landed like a gunshot in the marble-quiet room. "I am done," she declared. Across from her, Dante Moretti did not move. He stood by the window with his back half turned, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand, and for a long moment the only sound was the storm, hammering the city 32 floors below. Then, slowly, with the terrifying calm of a man who had already calculated every possible outcome, he set the glass down on the black marble console. His dark eyes lifted to hers, and Sofia felt her breath catch. "No," he said, "you are not." To understand how a soft-spoken florist ended up standing in the penthouse of the most feared man in the city, declaring her freedom to a Mafia king who had never once in his life been told, "No, we have to go back. We have to go back 6 months to a small flower shop on the corner of Bleecker and Vine, where a large, curvy young woman with kind brown eyes and flower still on her sleeve from the bakery next door was arranging peonies in a crystal vase and humming to herself." Sofia Bellini was 26 years old, and by every metric world used to measure women, she had been quietly, gently overlooked her entire life. She was plus size, with a full round face, soft warm cheeks, heavy arms. She liked to hide under long cardigans, a broad soft torso, and wide hips that she carried with a slightly apologetic sway. She was not the woman men noticed when she walked into a room. She was the woman who handed them their bouquet, smiled at them, wished them luck with their date, and went home to a small apartment above the shop, with a cat named Basil, and a mug of chamomile tea. She was, in her own quiet way, wonderful. She remembered every customer's anniversary. She slipped extra sprigs of lavender into bouquets for the elderly widower who came in every Friday. She stayed late to help the nervous young man practice what he was going to say to the girl he loved, and she never not once expected anything in return. That was why, when the tall man in the impossibly expensive black coat first walked into her shop on a rainy Tuesday, she did not recognize him for what he was. She only saw a very handsome, very quiet customer with eyes like a winter sea. He asked for white lilies, 3 dozen. Delivered weekly, to an address on the north side, no card. Sofia had blinked, smiled, and written it down, of course she had said. Any preference on the arrangement? He had studied her for a long moment, longer than was polite, and then he had said, in a voice like smoke and gravel, "Whatever you think is best." She had not known his name. She had only known that he came back the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that, and every Tuesday for 4 months, always at exactly 4 in the afternoon, always in the same black coat, always ordering the same lilies. He rarely spoke. He never smiled. But his eyes followed her whenever she moved through the shop, and sometimes when she looked up unexpectedly, she caught him watching her with an intensity that made her cheeks burn and her hands fumble the shears. She told her best friend Marisol about him. Of course. Marisol was a bright, cheerful hairdresser, with a loud laugh, and no patience for Sofia's habit of hiding. "He is in love with you," Marisol declared, "over cheap wine and take-out dumplings." Sofia had laughed so hard she snorted. "Men like that do not fall in love with women like me," she said. "Men like that of supermodels. He is probably sending those lilies to a grave, or a mistress, or his mother." Marisol had rolled her eyes. "Sofia, you are beautiful. You are the softest, kindest, most gorgeous woman I know. And that man is not looking at you like you are a florist. He is looking at you like you are the only person in the room." Sofia had not believed her. She had never learned how his name, though she did not know it yet, was Dante Moretti. He was 34 years old, and he was the head of the Moretti Empire, which stretched across shipping, finance, construction, and a dozen darker enterprises whispered about only behind closed doors. He was, in the words of the men who feared him, the silent king. He had inherited his father's throne at 22, and had spent the next 12 years quietly, methodically, and terrifyingly consolidating power until there was not a single deal made in the city that did not, in some way, pass under his shadow. He did not laugh, he did not raise his voice, he killed with paperwork and buried enemies under contracts. And on a Tuesday afternoon 4 months ago, he had ducked into a small flower shop to escape a sudden downpour, and he had seen a large, curvy woman with flower on her sleeve, laughing with an old man about his wife's favorite carnations, and something inside his chest. He had gone back to his car that day and sat in silence for 20 minutes. Then he had turned to his second-in-command, a wry, sharp-eyed man named Luca Ferrari, and he had said, "Find out everything about her." Luca, who had known Dante since they were boys, had raised one eyebrow slowly. "About the florist, boss, everything," Dante had said. And so it had begun. The lilies were an excuse. The Tuesday visits were an excuse. Dante Moretti, a man who had negotiated arms deals across 3 continents, could not bring himself to say a single honest word to a soft-spoken florist, so instead he had done what he did best. He had built an invisible empire around her. He had bought the building her shop was in, quietly, through 3 shell companies, so that her landlord could never raise her rent. He had arranged for the crime rate on her block to drop mysteriously and dramatically over the course of a single month. He had funded, anonymously, the small business grant that allowed her to expand her back room. And he had assigned 2 of his most discreet men to watch her apartment every night from a black sedan parked across the street, because he could not sleep unless he knew she was safe. Sophia had noticed none of it. She had only noticed him. And then, one Thursday evening in October, the inciting incident had arrived, dressed in a designer gown and heels she could not afford, at a charity gala she had never wanted to attend. Marisol had dragged her there. It was a floral industry event, she had insisted, held at the ballroom of the Chandler Hotel, and there would be contacts and buyers and, more importantly, free champagne. Sophia had squeezed herself into a navy blue dress that Marisol swore made her look like a goddess, and had spent the first 30 minutes standing, awkwardly, by the ice sculpture, clutching a glass of water, and trying not to be seen. That was where Camilla Ashford found her. Camilla was the kind of woman who had been born on top of the world and had spent her entire life kicking down at anyone below her. Tall, thin, blonde, and sharp as a razor, she was the daughter of one of the city's oldest real estate families. She had, for reasons Sophia could not fathom, decided that Sophia was the perfect target for a very public, very cruel evening of sport. She had approached with her circle of laughing friends, champagne flute in hand, and she had looked Sophia up and down with the kind of slow, dissecting smile that made every woman in the world flinch. "Oh my God," Camilla had said, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "Did they let the catering staff wear cocktail dresses this year? How progressive." Sophia had felt her face burn. She had opened her mouth, closed it, and set her water glass down, with fingers that would not stop shaking. "I am," she began. "I am a florist. I was invited." Camilla had tilted her head. "A florist? Oh, that is precious. Sweetheart, do the peonies come free with the dress size, or is that extra?" The laughter that rippled around them was the worst part. Not loud, not even mean. Just polite, uncomfortable, embarrassed laughter, the laughter of a room full of people who had decided it was easier to laugh along than to defend a stranger. Sophia felt tears rising, and she willed them down. Willed them down. Willed them down. Please, she whispered. I am not bothering anyone. Camilla had leaned closer, close enough that Sophia could smell her perfume, and she had said, very sweetly, Honey, your existence is bothering me. Why do you not do everyone a favor and waddle back to your little shop before someone mistakes you for the dessert cart? The silence that followed was terrible. And then, from somewhere behind Sophia, a voice cut through the ballroom like a blade, dropped onto glass. That is enough. Every head in the room turned. Dante Moretti stood at the entrance of the ballroom in a black tuxedo that fit him the way armor fits a knight, and for the first time in her life, Sophia saw the man behind the quiet Tuesday customer. His face was terrifyingly calm. His eyes were black ice. And when he began to walk across the room toward them, the crowd parted around him the way water parts around a shark. Camilla had gone the color of curdled milk. Mr. Moretti, she stammered. I did not know you were, I did not see you. Dante did not look at her. He walked past her as though she did not exist, stopped in front of Sophia, and, without asking, slipped off his tuxedo jacket and settled it around her trembling shoulders. It was warm from him and smelled of cedar and something darker, and Sophia's knees almost gave out. Are you all right? He asked her quietly. She could only nod. Only then did he turn his head 1 single degree toward Camilla. Miss Ashford, he said, your father's construction company holds 3 permits from the city that are currently under review. By morning, those permits will be denied. Your family's real estate portfolio contains 4 buildings that sit on land my company owns the mineral rights to. By the end of the week, those rights will be exercised. And the charity board that so graciously invited you here this evening receives 90% of its funding from the Moretti Foundation. By tomorrow, your name will not appear on any guest list in this city, at any event, for any reason, ever again. Camilla's champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. Do you understand me? Dante asked softly. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Then apologize, he said to the woman you were speaking to. And then leave. Camilla had turned to Sophia, mascara running, and had choked out an apology so raw and terrified that Sophia almost felt sorry for her. Then she had fled the ballroom, her friends scattering behind her like startled birds. Dante had turned back to Sophia and offered her his arm. Come, he said. I will take you home. Sophia had walked out of that ballroom on the arm of the most powerful man in the city, and every single person in the room had watched her go, and for the first time in her life, she had not felt invisible. She had felt seen. She had felt protected. And she had felt, in a way she could not yet name, absolutely and completely terrified. In the back of the black sedan, gliding through the rainy streets, she had finally found her voice. Why? She had asked him softly. Why did you do that? Dante had looked out the window for a long moment before he answered. Because no one else would, he said. She had studied his profile, the sharp jaw, the dark hair, the eyes that never quite settled. Who are you? She had asked. Really? Twet. Really? He had turned to her then, and for one brief, unguarded second, she had seen something almost like pain in his face. I am a man, he had said, who has been buying lilies for 4 months, just so he could see you smile. Sophia had not slept that night. The next morning, everything changed. Not violently, not obviously. But the invisible walls of Dante Moretti's protection, which had always been around her, began to close in. The lilies still came on Tuesdays, but now they came with a note. Just a single line, written in a hand that was sharp and elegant and unmistakable. Are you well today, Sophia? She would write back. On the back of the delivery slip, yes, thank you. And the next Tuesday there would be another note. What did you eat for lunch? And are you sleeping enough? She had laughed the first time she read it. Then she had answered. They began, in a strange and quiet way, to court. He would appear at her shop on Thursdays, now sometimes for 5 minutes, sometimes for an hour, and he would stand in a corner with his hands in his pockets and watch her work. He never touched her, he rarely spoke. But he brought her coffee, always exactly the way she liked it, though she did not remember ever telling him how she took it. He brought her books he had noticed she glanced at in the shop window across the street. He asked her about her mother, who had died when she was 19, and he listened to her stories with a stillness that felt like the deepest attention she had ever received. Marisol was ecstatic. He is obsessed with you, she crowed, over dumplings. Sophia, this man is going to marry you. He does not even know if I like him back, Sophia protested. Sophia. He knows, trust me. That man knows every time you sneeze in your sleep. Sophia had laughed. She had not known how right her friend was. Meanwhile, in a very different room across the city, Luca Ferrari was leaning against Dante's desk, with his arms crossed, and an expression of enormous, unhidden amusement. You know, Luca had said, most men just ask a girl out for dinner, boss. You have quietly acquired her landlord, her insurance provider, her supplier, and, if I am not mistaken, the coffee shop next to her apartment. It was an efficient acquisition, Dante had said, without looking up from his papers. Efficient. Luca had repeated, grinning. Sure. Have you considered actually telling her that you are in love with her? Dante's pen had paused. Only for a heartbeat. Then he had continued writing. She is not ready, he had said. Luca had sighed and shaken his head. Boss, you are not ready. She is going to walk into that shop one day and marry the first nice accountant who asks her, and you will be standing in the corner still deciding whether to tell her your name. Dante had looked up then, slowly, and his eyes had been terrifying. No, he had said. She will not. Luca had raised his hands in surrender. Then he had left the office still smiling because he had known his friend for 20 years and he had never, not once, seen him like this. Somewhere in the city, in a dim room with maps on the walls and a wire dangling from a burner phone, another man was watching the situation unfold with very different feelings. His name was Vincenzo Aldera, and he had been Dante's father's business partner once, before he had tried to have Dante killed at 23 and had been quietly, brutally exiled. He had spent the last 11 years rebuilding his own shadow empire in the cracks of the Moretti kingdom, and he had waited, patiently, for a weakness. He had just found one. A large, curvy woman with kind eyes and flower on her sleeve. The invisible war began then, though Sophia did not know it. Strange men appeared near her shop, and were quietly removed by other, quieter men before she noticed. A shipment of her flowers was tampered with, and was intercepted before it reached her. A rival florist across the city was approached by unknown parties, and by morning, that florist had accepted a very generous offer to move his business to another state, permanently. Dante fought a war in whispers, and Sophia arranged peonies in crystal vases. And the two of them fell, slowly and painfully, in love. The first time he kissed her was on a Sunday afternoon in the greenhouse behind her shop. She had been repotting a rosebush, and had turned to say something to him, and he had been closer than she had expected, and he had looked at her with such open, terrifying want that she had forgotten how to breathe. He had bent his head slowly, giving her every chance to stop him. She had not stopped him. His mouth had been warm and firm and unbearably gentle, and when he had pulled back she had seen, for the first time, a smile ghost across his lips. I have wanted to do that, he had said, for 137 days. Sophia had laughed, and then she had cried, and then she had kissed him again, and Dante Moretti, the silent king, had held a curvy florist in a dusty greenhouse and had understood, finally, what his father had meant when he had said, on his deathbed, that power was only worth what you were willing to lay it down to protect. For 3 weeks they were happy. Quietly, secretly, incandescently. Happy. She met him for dinner in private rooms of restaurants she had never known existed. He learned to cook her scrambled eggs badly, in his enormous penthouse kitchen. She fell asleep against his shoulder on his black leather couch, and he did not move for 4 hours because he did not want to wake her. And then, on a cold Thursday in November, Vincenzo Aldera made his move. Sofia was closing the shop for the night when the 2 men in dark coats walked through the door. She looked up, smiled, and began to say that they were just closing, and then she saw the gun in the first man's hand, and the smile died on her face. "Miss Bellini," the man had said politely, "we would like you to come with us." She had run for the back door. She had made it 3 steps. And then the world had gone white and roaring and dark. She woke in the trunk of a car. Across the city, in his office, 32 floors above the street, Dante Moretti's phone had rung once. He had answered it. And Luca, on the other end, had said only 3 words. "She is gone." For one terrible, endless second, Dante Moretti did not breathe. Then, very quietly, he had stood up from his desk, walked to the window, and had said, a voice so calm it was terrifying, "Black Protocol." Luca had already been running. Black Protocol was the name of a plan Dante had drafted in the 2nd week he had known Sofia. It had never been activated. It required the simultaneous coordination of every asset in the Moretti empire. From the shipping contracts on the harbor to the security cameras in half the city's buildings. From the men in the police department who owed him favors to the hackers in the basement who had never seen sunlight. It was designed for one purpose only: to find her. Within 20 minutes, every road out of the city was watched. Within 30, every private airfield was locked. Within 43 of Vincenzo Aldera's shell companies had been identified, traced, and had their financial assets frozen. Within an hour, a face was on every screen in the Moretti network. Vincenzo's face. Dante had not raised his voice once. He had simply stood in the middle of a war room of 35 men and had given orders in a low, even tone, and 35 men had moved as though they were his hands. "Find her," he had said. "Has. Find her now." In the trunk of the car, Sofia had wept quietly. She had thought of her mother. She had thought of Marisol. She had thought of Basil, her cat, who would be hungry. And at the very end, when she was sure she was going to die, she had thought of Dante, and of the smile he had given her in the greenhouse. And she had whispered his name against the metal floor. The car had stopped. She had been dragged out. She had been thrown, blindfolded, onto a cold concrete floor in what smelled like an old warehouse. A man's voice had spoken to her, smooth and cultured and cruel. "Miss Bellini," Vincenzo had said, "you have no idea how important you have become." She had not answered. "You see," Vincenzo continued, "Dante Moretti is a man of very few weaknesses. But he has at last developed one, and I intend to use it." Sofia had lifted her chin, though she could not see him. "He will come for me," she had said very softly. "Yes," Vincenzo had said, laughing, "that is rather the idea." He had left her there, in the dark on the cold floor, and he had gone to arrange his ambush. But Vincenzo had made one mistake. He had assumed that Dante would come the way most men would come. Alone, or with a small strike team. In the middle of the night, through the front. He had prepared his men accordingly. He had wired the warehouse with charges. He had positioned snipers. He had made his stand. He had not understood that Dante Moretti did not fight like most men. Dante did not come alone. He did not come at night. He did not come at night. He came at 4 in the afternoon, with 40 men, with 3 helicopters, with 2 armored vehicles, with the full weight of a private army that most governments could not have fielded, and he came from every direction at once. Vincenzo's snipers were disabled from behind, before they saw the first shadow. Vincenzo's men in the warehouse were flooded with gas and cuffed before they could reach their weapons. The charges were disarmed by a team of Dante's engineers within 4 minutes of entry. And Dante, in a black tactical coat, with a pistol in his hand and eyes like a storm, walked through the smoking front door of Vincenzo Alvara's stronghold, as though he owned it, because in every meaningful sense he now did. He found her in a back room, on the concrete floor, blindfolded, shivering, but alive. He crossed the room in 3 strides. He was on his knees beside her before he had holstered his weapon. He lifted the blindfold from her eyes with hands that shook, hands that had not shaken in 12 years, and when she blinked up at him, in the dim light and whispered his name, Dante Moretti, the silent king, made a sound that was almost a sob. "Sophia," he said. "Sophia. Forgive me. Forgive me." She had reached up and touched his face. "It is you," she had whispered. "You came." "I will always come," he had said. "Always." Behind him, in the main hall of the warehouse, Vincenzo Aldera was on his knees, with his hands behind his head, staring at the ruin of everything he had spent 11 years building. Luca stood over him, with a small, grim smile. "You should have stayed retired," Luca had said pleasantly. Vincenzo had spat blood on the floor. Dante had carried Sophia out of that warehouse in his own arms. He had refused, over the objections of his men, to let anyone else touch her. He had walked her out through the smoke, and the men in tactical gear, and the flashing lights of the vehicles, and he had placed her, gently, in the back seat of his car, and he had wrapped her in his coat, and he had held her hand the entire drive back to the city. In the hospital, when the doctors had cleared her and given her something to help her sleep, she had turned to him in the private room, and had looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "You bought the building," she had said quietly. He had gone still. "You bought the building. My shop is in. You paid for the grant. You made the crime rate drop. You had men watching my apartment. You made the other florist leave town. You have been protecting me for months." Dante had bowed his head. "Yes," he had said. "Why did you not tell me?" she had whispered. "Because," he had said, and his voice was rough, "because I did not want you to feel that you owed me anything. I did not want you to love me because I had made your life easier. I wanted you to love me because I was the man you chose." Sophia had begun to cry. She had reached for him. He had gathered her against his chest, and had held her, and she had wept into his shirt, and after a very long time, she had lifted her face and had said, "You idiot. I loved you the first time you asked me what I had eaten for lunch." He had laughed. It was, Luca would say later, the first time in living memory anyone had ever heard Dante Moretti laugh. But not everything was over. Not yet. Vincenzo, sitting in a cell in a place that did not appear on any map, had made one last play. He had contacts, still, in a corrupt corner of the district attorney's office, Sisti. And 2 weeks after the warehouse, Sophia was arrested at her shop, in front of Marisol, in front of her customers, on charges of federal money laundering. A bank account had been discovered in her name, $12 million. Traced, through a paper trail so convincing it must have taken years to build, to a Colombian cartel. She had been handcuffed. She had been photographed. She had been marched out of her flower shop in front of the neighbors, weeping. When Dante heard, he did not shout. He did not break anything. He stood very still in his office for exactly 17 seconds. And then he began to work. He had known this move was coming. He had prepared for it. In the 6 months since he had first seen Sofia in the rain, he had quietly assembled the most formidable legal team in the country. And he had, more importantly, quietly acquired evidence of every corrupt transaction Vincenzo's remaining allies had ever made. When Sofia was arraigned the next morning, she walked into the courtroom on the arm of the finest attorney in 3 states, and she walked out 4 hours later, completely exonerated. At the same time, in 3 cities across the country, arrests were being made. The prosecutor who had signed the warrant was suddenly under federal investigation. The judge who had approved the account freeze was suddenly retiring. Vincenzo's last remaining lieutenants were suddenly cooperating with authorities in exchange for reduced sentences that they would still never serve out. And Vincenzo himself, in his cell, received a single visitor, Dante Moretti. They spoke for 11 minutes. No one ever knew what was said. But 3 days later, Vincenzo Aldera pleaded guilty to every charge that could be leveled at him, refused all appeals, and disappeared into the deepest hole the federal system could dig. Sofia was safe. Truly safe. For the first time in her adult life, and that at last brings us back to the beginning, to the rainy night on the 32nd floor, to the suitcase in her trembling hand, to the words that had shocked Dante Moretti into stillness. "I am done," she had said. Because Sofia, kind and gentle and soft as she was, had also, over these 6 months, begun to change. She had been humiliated in a ballroom and rescued by a king. She had been kidnapped and rescued by an army. She had been arrested and rescued by a legal storm. And somewhere along the way, in all of that being rescued, she had begun to feel that she was disappearing. That the woman who had once arranged peonies and hummed to herself and lived a small, quiet, brave life was being folded gently into the shadow of a man who loved her too much to let her breathe. She had tried to tell him. Twice. 3 times he had listened with that terrifying stillness of his, and he had nodded, and then, the next day, a new bodyguard had appeared, or a new lawyer, or a new car with armored windows. He could not stop protecting her. It was the only language he knew. And so tonight she had packed a small suitcase. She had come to the penthouse, and she had told him she was leaving. Not forever, she said, now, her voice trembling but steady. Not because I do not love you. I love you, Dante. I love you more than I know how to say. But I need to be a person again. I need to open my shop tomorrow morning without 3 men in earpieces watching from across the street. I need to walk to Marisol's apartment without a car following me. I need to be Sofia, not the queen you are trying to keep behind glass. Dante had not moved. His face was terrifyingly calm. But his hand, on the console beside the whiskey glass, had curled into a slow fist. "Sofia," he said quietly, "it is not safe." "It is safe," she said. "Vincenzo is gone. His men are gone. You told me yourself." "The war," he said, "is never over, for men like me." "Then I cannot be with a man like you," she said. The words hung in the air. For a long, terrible moment, she thought he might turn away. She thought he might, in his coldest voice, tell her to go. She had prepared herself for that. She thought, been ready. Instead, Dante Moretti walked slowly across the marble floor and stopped in front of her. He did not touch her. He simply looked at her, and in his eyes, for the first time she had ever seen it, was something raw and open and afraid. "No," he said. She blinked. "Dante." "No," he said again. "I am not letting you go, not because I own you, not because I do not trust you, because I love you, Sofia, and I have spent my entire life keeping every door locked in every room I have ever walked into, and I do not know how to leave a door open for the one person I cannot lose." So teach me. Stay. Stay and teach me. Sophia's eyes had filled with tears. The men across the street will go, he said. Tonight. The cars will go. The lawyers will go. I will not send men to your shop. I will not follow you to Marisol's. I will not know where you are every hour of every day. I will hate every second of it. I will not sleep. But I will do it. Because you are asking me to. Sophia's suitcase slipped from her hand and thumped softly onto the floor. You would do that, she whispered. For me. Sophia, he said. I have burned empires for you. I have knelt on a concrete floor for you. Do you truly not understand yet? She was crying now. She could not help it. Understand what? That there is nothing, he said. Nothing in this world I would not lay down at your feet. Including, if you demand it, my own nature. She had stared at him. And then, very slowly, she had walked forward, and she had put her arms around his waist, and she had pressed her face against his chest, and she had said, quite clearly, do not send them away. He had gone very still. Do not send them away, she had said again, into his shirt. Send half of them away. Or 2/3, or however many you can bear. Meet me in the middle, because I do not want to leave you, Dante. I have never wanted to leave you. I only want to be seen as a woman who chose you, and not a woman you keep. His arms had closed around her, slowly, carefully, as though she were made of glass. Then be a woman who chose me, he had said, into her hair. Please. Every day, choose me. I choose you, she had said. I choose you. 6 months later, on a bright afternoon in the first week of spring, the corner of Bleecker and Vine was closed to traffic. A crowd had gathered on the sidewalk. Marisol was there, weeping openly. Luca was there, in a dark suit, with a small, unreadable smile. Half the neighborhood was there. Above the door of the flower shop a new sign had been installed. Bellini and Moretti Florists. In smaller letters underneath, a foundation for community gardens and small business grants, funded by the Moretti family. Sophia stood in front of the shop in a soft blue dress that flattered every full curve of her round face bright, her wide hips carried now with a confidence she had never once shown before. Beside her, Dante Moretti, in a charcoal suit with no tie, held her hand as though it were the only thing anchoring him to the earth. He turned to her in front of the crowd, and he did something that no one who had ever known him would have believed possible. He got down on one knee, on the sidewalk of Bleecker and Vine, in front of half the neighborhood and every camera Luca had discreetly arranged, and he pulled from his pocket a small velvet box. Sophia Bellini, he said, and his voice, though quiet, carried perfectly in the sudden hush. I have known for 6 months and 32 days that I was going to ask you this. I have waited because I wanted you to know, first, that you had chosen me, that you were not trapped, that the doors are open, and you have stayed. Now that you know, I am asking, will you marry me? Sophia was crying and laughing at once. She could not speak. She only nodded, again and again and again. And Dante slid the ring onto her finger, and he stood up, and he kissed her, and the crowd broke into applause that shook the windows. Marisol was screaming and hugging Luca, who looked mildly alarmed, but pleased. Basil the cat, in Sophia's apartment window above the shop, watched with mild feline disinterest. Later that evening, in the greenhouse behind the shop, Dante and Sophia sat together on the small wooden bench where he had first kissed her. She was leaning against his shoulder. He was, very quietly, humming. You are humming, she said, amazed. I know, he said. I have never heard you hum. I know, he said again. She laughed, and she pressed a kiss to his jaw, and she said, So this is what a happily ever after looks like. He turned his head and looked down at her, and in his eyes was a softness she had spent 6 months teaching him how to show. No, he said, this is what it starts to look like. The rest, we build. And they did. She kept her shop. She still arranged peonies in crystal vases. She still slipped lavender into bouquets for the elderly widower who came in every Friday. But now, she walked with her head high, and she smiled at her own reflection in the shop window when she passed it, and she no longer apologized for the space her body took up in a room, because a man who could burn empires had knelt on a sidewalk for her, and she had learned at last that she had always been worth kneeling for. Dante changed too, not entirely. He was still the silent king. He still ruled a vast, terrifying empire from a black glass office 32 floors above the city. But he laughed sometimes, now low and rare, and he brought coffee to a flower shop every Tuesday afternoon. And he learned, slowly, painfully, wonderfully, how to leave doors open. And if you had asked him on any given evening what the greatest thing he had ever built was, he would not have said the empire. He would not have said the tower. He would not have said the fortune. He would have said, quietly, without hesitation, her. Because, in the end, the story of Sofia Bellini and Dante Moretti was not a story about a king and a florist, or a mafia boss and an ordinary girl, or power and softness, or shadow and light. It was a story about two people who had been overlooked, in different ways, by different worlds, and who had chosen, against every odd and every enemy, to see each other. It was a story about the terrifying strength it takes to love someone gently. It was a story about the even greater strength it takes to let yourself be loved. She had once said, on a rainy night standing in a marble penthouse with a suitcase in her hand, that she was done. And a possessive mafia boss, who had sealed every exit of his heart for 34 years, had at last unlocked every one of them, and refused to let her escape his love. Havri,